All right, Brad and Angie and their lawsuit over Chateau Miraval in France. This is not a new case. This is a case that's been around for a couple of years, but a case management order was filed earlier this week with the LA Superior Court indicating that this case might be ready to go to trial as early as next year. And from what I can see on the docket, it looks like it is getting to that point where it could be ready to go to trial on the issues that are left. In the LA Superior Court website, you can see the docket and you can see the first page of the documents, but you can't see the whole document unless you buy it. So I am going off what I can tell from the docket itself and the first page. And before anybody asks, unlike the Lively Baldoni situation where neither of those people meant anything to me and I don't consume any of their products or their art, I have long been a fan of both of these people. You know, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, in my opinion, are both phenomenal actors. They've both made phenomenal films. I've enjoyed their art very much. They're both beautiful people. I never really had much of a sense of like who they were as human beings. They both seemed like Hollywoodish kind of people. I remember when Shiloh was born. I remember like all the drama about that and having to move from France to Africa and have the baby in Africa because the paparazzi wouldn't leave them alone. So I do remember all of that kind of thing, but I have really no love nor hate for either one of them at this point. But you know, I know enough about sort of the things that have happened in and around them that I can see the context for what's happening in this case. So the lawsuit centers on this property in France, Miraval, which is this sprawling estate with vineyards and a main house and guest houses and pools. And the couple bought this and they said, you know, we're going to fix this up. We're going to renovate this. We're going to turn this vineyard into a working vineyard. And this is going to become our family estate. It's going to become the place where our kids grow up. It's going to become their inheritance. And we're going to make a profitable wine business out of these vineyards. And so they set about doing that. And they think they did it over the course of about 10 years. Now, depending on whose complaint you read, Pitt says he did all of the work and she did nothing. He says he's the one who figured out how to make the wine by entering into a partnership with another company. He's the one who did all the architectural renovations. He's the one who put more money into the house. She says she was raising 6 kids, and so yeah, she didn't do everything, but also he pretty much pushed her out and said, no, I want to do it my way, including making changes and spending money that wasn't necessary, like spending $1 million to build a 6th pool on the property. If you remember their history, they lived together for quite some time without being married. They eventually did get married. They entered into all of these agreements to buy this property before they were ever married. Lots of companies were created, and they're French companies and Luxembourg companies, and there's all kinds of little subsidiaries. If I were trying this case, if I were actually working on this case, I'd have to make a chart of who's related to who and what shares go into this. So it's one of those kinds. But none of that really matters for purposes of the case all of that much. It was an asset they had before they were married. It was an asset they had after they were married. As we all know, in 2016, there was a very troubled private plane flight from France to Los Angeles. And not very long thereafter, Angelina filed for divorce. And after she filed for divorce, there were negotiations about what are we going to do with this property now? Because obviously these people are not together. They are splitting up. And they own this business and this colossal home together. How are we going to split this thing up? And it was agreed on pretty early by all of the parties that the Miraval estate was not community property for purposes of the divorce, in large part because it's in France. And a divorce court and a divorce judge in Los Angeles does not have jurisdiction over what to do with a French estate. Not to mention the fact that they bought it and put their money into it and made these companies in which they hold it all before they were married. So even though they have now settled their divorce has nothing to do with this one remaining issue, which is what happens to this property that they both own, that's their biggest asset, that is not included in the divorce community property estate. So after they split up and it starts to get really ugly, and we all know about those kinds of stories and things started coming out about the children and custody and they're fighting and all of that, they realize, okay, we cannot own this thing together. And so Pitt says, listen, I'll buy it. And he had kind of a right of first refusal to buy the property. Some of it's in the documents, but most of it is just an understanding that he claims these two had, that like, obviously this is a family estate. We're never going to have like one of us own it and one of it be owned by a stranger. It's sort of all or nothing. And so Pitt said, listen, I'd like to buy Jolie out of her part of Miraval. And they started negotiating for that. And here's where the stories really diverge. He says they're negotiating and they're getting close to a price. And then all of a sudden, out of absolutely nowhere, she pulls out and says, I'm not negotiating anymore. She says she's negotiating in good faith, but she is also talking to a backup offer just in case, and that the deal falls apart because despite having negotiated for many, many months, at the 11th hour, Pitt's lawyers add something into the sale agreement. It's basically a gag clause that says that she cannot speak publicly about Brad Pitt on any matter. And she's like, I'm not agreeing to that because if I have to talk in public or in a court about the shit that he did to my children, I'm going to do that. So she claims the deal fell apart because of this last minute non-disparagement clause. He claims the deal fell apart because she never really intended to sell it to him anyway, and that she had this backup offer with the people and this apparent Russian oligarch who own the Stolchanaya vodka company. She eventually does sell her share of Miraval to this Russian Stoli vodka guy for about $60 million. Pitt flips his shit and files this lawsuit saying she had no right to do that, that she is messing with a lot of the agreements he has with other investors and other partners in the winery in particular, and that they had an oral unwritten agreement that if either one of them ever had to sell part of their property, they would only sell it to each other and they would never sell it to a third party, and that she has violated that agreement. She says, before we bought it, as part of the sale agreement, one of the lawyers actually said, do you want to have something in there, a term of agreement of your ownership that says that you'll only sell to each other? And Pitt said, no, we don't need it. She also said, we had lawyers from 3 different countries drafting up all kinds of agreements and bylaws and stuff for all these holding companies, and never once did he bring up this idea that this was not an agreement we had. And even if we had some like tacit understanding, or he thought we did, it all fell apart on that plane when I had to stop worrying about Miraval and start worrying about the safety of my children. So his main claim is breach of an implied contract. So he's saying, even though it was never written down, that Pitt and Jolie had an oral contract and understanding. They had the elements of a contractor: offer, acceptance, and consideration. That they had an oral understanding, an agreement that they would never sell their portion to someone who wasn't family. She says, that's bullshit. No, we didn't. And here's my way of proving it to you, is that we talked about having that in writing and you said no. Her counterclaims back at him are really just an action for a declaratory judgment to say, I want this court to declare that they had no such agreement and that her sale of her portion of Miraval is final. Because I think what Pitt ultimately wants to do is to have that sale pulled back and changed so that he can own it all. He claims if she had told me she was negotiating with a third party and they were offering her 64 when I was only offering 53, I would have met that offer. And he claims that she had a legal responsibility to do so. And she says, no, I didn't. And you're just mad because you wanted this all for yourself, because this is the only thing that matters to you. And I wanted to get away from Miraval, wanted it out of our family. By the way, our kids cannot go back there. It's too traumatizing for them. The only person who cares about Miraval is you. Now, it seems like a lot of Pitt's complaint is that the Stoli guy that she sold it to seems like an absolutely terrible person. He's like involved with the Russian oligarchy, probably the Russian mafia. But I think the real problem here is that this guy won't sell his share to Pitt. So Pitt has no other choice if he wants this vineyard than to go through the courts. So tell me what questions you have. That was just an overview. There's a lot more, and I'm happy to answer them about these gorgeous people.